What about our diet? If we're thinking about general eye health here, and perhaps we can, as we move through this, if there are any specific conditions where diet is even more important or specific nutrients are, we can kind of call them out. But broadly speaking, when someone comes to see you and just says, "Hey, doc, does my diet, do the foods that I'm eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, are they affecting my vision?"
Simon, thank you for bringing this up, because this is obviously something that diet nutrition is something that you focus on pretty heavily and are passionate about, but it's also something I'm very interested in. The answer is yes. Your diet does change your risk for eye disease and how your eyes and vision function. The vast majority of research in the eyes specifically do indicate that eating a Mediterranean diet or an ancestral Mediterranean diet, and I say that just because, again, we want to be avoiding processed foods. We want to avoid high sugar, artificial sweeteners, these sort of things. But the Mediterranean diet, one, green leafy vegetables. I try to tell everybody, eat your greens. Even though everyone thinks carrots, right, are the food for the eyes. And carrots are good for the eyes because they have a lot of beta carotene, which your body can either convert to vitamin A in your liver or in your small intestine, and your eyes will use vitamin A for phototransduction, but also because beta carotene is a good antioxidant. However, green leafy vegetables have potentially even more benefits for the eye, and I'll go into the specific kind of nutrients of why that is. But the vast majority of research looking at aging eye diseases, cataracts and macular degeneration, they do support that people who eat more leafy greens and potentially more fatty fish at least twice a week have dramatically reduced risk of developing and progressing in those diseases. Same thing for people who have diabetes and diabetic retinopathy.
Have you ever come across the MIND diet? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, I have come across that. There are a few publications looking at MIND diet for eye health as well.
Yeah, it was you mentioned dark leafy greens and fatty fish there, and it just reminded me of that kind of dietary pattern. And I think that was out of Rush University. They were looking more at a dietary pattern that could help reduce the risk of dementia. So also similar area of the body, brain related at least. And I know within that there was a strong emphasis on having like a daily salad and a good serving of dark leafy greens.
And it's interesting because both macular degeneration and glaucoma more or less are kind of cousins to like Alzheimer's and dementia. They are all neurosensory degenerative diseases. And there's a lot of research going into how we can diagnose and track Alzheimer's through eye exams now, which are quite fascinating.
Just quickly, while we're on that, and then I'll let you get back to the foods and dark leafy greens and nutrients. I had an episode recently with Dr. Kellyanne Niotis, and she's a preventive neurologist. And we were talking about a new kind of committee report on preventing dementia. And it was published in The Lancet, and they came out with 14 risk factors. And they basically said if fully addressed, about 1 in 2 cases of dementia could be prevented. And it was very interesting to me to see that uncorrected vision loss was actually one of those risk factors for dementia.
I mean, I think it makes sense because of how much of your brain are you using if you can't see very well, right? You're
right.
By having good vision, you're increasing the amount of accurate, amount of data points from just eyesight coming into your brain and feeding your brain. So if your vision starts deteriorating, you're sending poor data to the brain, and it's just not being able to use that effectively. So there's different thoughts about having good hearing, good mental, good vision, and its effects on risk for dementia and just Alzheimer's in general. Back to kind of talking about the diet component. So there's again a lot of research into diet and lifestyle factors that affect the eyes. in 2024 alone, just as a kind of a recent study, because you can go further back, but even just a recent study that was published this year in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, they looked at the original ARED studies, the age-related eye disease studies. These are large-scale studies, thousands and thousands of people. They track them, their diet, and their blood tests every week for anywhere from 5 to 10 years, depending on which study. And they track their eyes and their vision, and they watch people develop things like macular degeneration, cataracts, etc. But they find that people who ate at least 2.7 servings of green leafy vegetables, and that's like nothing, right? 2.7 servings a week. Usually we want,
wow.
Yeah, we usually are like, we want that a day, if not more, but that was like just a week. The people who ate 2.7 servings a week had a 25% reduction in progression of macular degeneration from going from early to advanced, which is significant. People who had oily fish in their diet at least twice a week had a not as significant, but it's about 21% reduction in their risk of progression. But there's a synergistic value. They found that people who ate both higher amounts of green leafy vegetables and the oily fish, they had a 41% reduction in progression. So it's important to understand that the retina in the back of the eye is one of the most highly metabolic tissues in the body. And so it's constantly being bombarded by light energy. And so it's a lot of oxidative stress. It's a lot of inflammatory processes because the cells in the retina have to constantly regenerate. And that ends up putting a huge tax on those tissues. And because it's neurosensory tissue, it also has a high level of omega-3, specifically DHA, types of omega-3 fatty acids. It counts somewhere between 50 and 60% of all of the lipid layers in those cells is DHA.
This episode is proudly brought to you by 38 Terra. Try 38 Terra's DMN prebiotic, the science-based daily multivitamin for your gut microbes, a simple and delicious way to take your gut health to the next level. Now back in stock in new and improved packaging for customers living in the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Get 10% off your DMN at 38terra.com using the code THEPROOF. That's 38terra.com and use the coupon code THEPROOF for 10% off. Do you think there is a difference, or is there any kind of evidence that you've seen that would suggest that risk reduction is from DHA itself, so it could be achieved just through supplementation, or is it perhaps that fish is providing some benefit to eyes beyond the DHA that it contains?
So this has been an area of fascination for me. And honestly, I ate very much a plant-based lifestyle, whole food plant-based, starting in about 2016, 2017, when I started really getting into diet and understanding its effect on the eye. I only started putting in a lot more fish because I started reading the research that shows a large discrepancy between, hey, if we look at studies where people are eating whole food sources of fish, their risk of retinal disease, both in diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, goes down. But people when we supplement only with omega-3 supplements, we don't see that same effect. And so there seems to be this interesting disconnect. And only until the last 5 years or so there's at least some publications kind of hinting toward why that may be. And part of this, again, has to do with DHA. I didn't know this. I didn't learn any of this in school. I had to study this all on my own afterward. But so there's different types of DHA omega-3s. There's triacylglycerol tag DHA. There's phospholipid DHA, and then there's lysophosphatidylcholine, or LPC DHA, and type 3. And neural tissue, your brain and the eye, they are very similar. They have the blood-brain barrier, and then there's the blood-retinal barrier. And there's a specific transporter called an MFSD2A, And it's a process that shunts specifically the LPC or the type 3 DHA into neural tissue. And when you eat animal products, whether it be salmon doesn't really have that much phospholipid in it, but fish roe, like fish eggs, and some krill oil has higher levels of type 2 DHA, which your body can break up into type 3 and type 1. Your body still does get some DHA into the neural tissue through the kind of triacylglycerol pathway, but it has to be broken down in the liver, and it's not as efficient. And so more recent studies, at least in animal studies, I couldn't find anything in human studies to date, but in animal studies in mice, they are finding when they feed this type of type 3 DHA to the mice, their risk of diabetic retinopathy and macular degeneration and overall retinal function is much better.
That's super interesting. So type 3 DHA, what was the kind of long name for that?
Lysophosphatidylcholine.
Lysophosphatidylcholine.
Or LPC DHA.
And are there any companies, to your knowledge, that are selling that form of DHA in a supplement?
There are some supplements. If you look on krill oil develops, about 30% of krill oil has at least type 2 DHA, which again, your body can convert. So there are some companies that are selling phospholipids with the DHA, but I don't know of any companies that are just selling the type 3. Because I haven't seen any human studies in it, and so they may be in the process of testing that out. But the few companies that are doing the research, or I shouldn't say the companies, but the people doing the research, especially in Alzheimer's, they're taking krill oil and then they're basically in the laboratory pulling off the type 3 DHA, and then they're concentrating that to 100% of that specific type 3, and they're giving that to mice. That's how they're studying it for Alzheimer's.
And so if people are eating, say, like a couple serves of fatty fish a week, so there's that SMASH acronym that you've probably heard, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and
yep.
herring. I think it's herring.
I think herring's in there. I personally eat salmon or sardines.
Right. And so if someone chooses that option and they have a couple of serves a week, they're getting enough of that type 3 DHA you're referring to?
At least it's tough for me to say exactly how much of this type 2 or type 3 DHA they're getting, because there's only a few sources I could find that really break it down that detailed. The two fish sources that have the most that I've found in the research are either in krill or they actually have it in fish roe. Fish eggs has a really high level of that type of DHA. So when I go and get sushi, I try to find whatever sushi they have that has fish eggs on it. That's at least where this research is currently at. I still think we need a lot more research before we can definitively say how much does somebody need, what kind of an effect will that have. But that's where the kind of cutting edge research in eye care and understanding the relationship of omega-3s to retinal health is at.
I wonder if there's any research looking at the kind of incidence of macular degeneration in vegetarians and vegans and whether that differs to omnivores. Have you seen anything that's looked at that?
Yes, there are some pretty good studies on that. They do find that the higher amount of meat consumption is at a higher risk of developing age-related eye diseases for both macular degeneration and cataract formation. They have broken it down further into like saturated fat. So saturated fat, higher intakes of that has a significant relationship to higher rates of macular degeneration. There is at least one voice in the carnivore community who strongly advocates that macular degeneration is caused by seed oils. However, again, large-scale published studies have actually shown that linoleic acid is only nominally very weakly associated with macular degeneration. So it's kind of interesting to see some voices and I'll say hypotheses that come out in that area. But right now, the vast majority of the research does suggest diets that are more rich in vegetables, whole foods, and some moderate amounts of oily fish are more protective for retinal function and eye health.
What would your advice be for someone who is consuming a sort of plant-rich diet, but for whatever reason doesn't want to eat seafood? What would your supplementation advice be for that person?
Of course, there is alternative sources for omega-3s. There are algal oils. There are studies, people taking like flaxseed oil supplements. I think I'd probably go the route of algal oil. I've even did my own self-study on that for several months. And I did have, it took me like 6 months of not having to take any omega-3 supplements just to get back to baseline. Because I actually went through a full self-study for several months, taking omega-3 supplements, the fish oils, watching my omega-3 index. I would take I'd get my index run by Omega Quant. I have no relationship to that company, but I would do my blood test through that, follow my numbers. And I went from when I first started, it was just mostly plant-based. And I was getting around 4.3% in my omega-3 index. Taking fish oils, I went all the way up to 9 something within just a few months. Then I went 6 months without eating any fish oils, but still eating some oily fish, and I was down to like 5 something. And then I took algal oil, and it went up to like 7. It didn't go up to 9 of what I got with the fish oil, but it got up to like 7. So it did have an effect.
Do you recall what dose of algal oil you were taking?
I was taking like 2,000 milligrams a day. And I was doing this, it's a lot. I was taking that specifically for dry eye. And there's a lot of research in omega-3 benefits for dry eyes, but it's very inconsistent and all over the place. There's a lot of debates in the eye care field about the effectiveness of omega-3s for dry eye specifically. But there are a lot of eye doctors in the dry eye space who recommend somewhere in a higher dose of 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day for omega-3. But it's tough to say exactly if that's that effective or not. Anecdotally, I had success in it, but dry eye is a very complex disease. And we can do a whole hour and a half podcast on just dry eye.